I just did a film and then apparently lost most of it, so I have to do it all over again. Um, I think this will be a shortish update this week. I'm actually away during the week. I have some credit with Air New Zealand to use up, and I've got to use up some leave at work. So I'm going up to Auckland to visit a few friends just for the week, so I won't be able to get much done on the car. It's also quite cold at the moment, so I've got the diesel heater working away there. But been looking at the car, been looking at various things during the week. The battery tie down stuff, I painted that yesterday, but as I say, it's so cold. When I came in this morning and touched it, the paint wasn't dry yet, so I've had to respray that. That's the carrier that the battery sits on. I removed the powder coating and repainted the battery tie downs. I really hate powder coat on a vintage car. You can see there that the paint isn't drying, just because it's so cold. And I've also been looking at treating and staining the timber parts of the car. And this is the platform the battery sits on that gets bolted to the diagonal. This is the spacer that sits on top of this metal bracket. These little holes clear the bolt heads. This is the second one I made. The first one, the holes had gone all the way through and I didn't like it, even though nobody will see that because the battery sits on top of them. But what I've done as an experiment is I have treated these bits of plywood and some little scraps of ash with the preservative I'm going to use, and then I've let that dry. I did that yesterday, and now I'm testing the stain. So the preservative leaves everything green. I think it's got copper in it as a antibacterial, antifungal type treatment. It'll be something like that. But this is the ash. You can see the green and then the black stain over the top. It takes quite a few coats of the stain, I believe. So this is the underside of these. I'm just testing that. It's come out okay. I'm not doing this so much for appearance, it's more for protection. I want all of the timber to be nicely protected and not likely to rot. So the materials I'm using, look over here. So this is the preservative, Metal X. You can get a clear version of this, but I believe it doesn't work so well. So I went for maximum protection over appearance, I guess. And this stuff goes a long way. You thin it down with mineral turpentine, 2 parts of this to 3 parts terps. This was my jar, I mixed it up in. The colour is interesting. It's actually almost exactly the same colour as the Land Rover, kind of a metallic turquoise looking thing. Then this is the stain I'm using over the top of it. It's an oil-based stain. I did ask at the shop what would be compatible with this, and they weren't really sure. They did say don't use resin paint, which probably doesn't mean anything to anyone but people in New Zealand. Apparently that isn't compatible with anything except itself. So this seems to be working. I don't know if mixing the two is a bad idea, or rather having that on there first and then going over it with this. I think that should be fine. Reading the instructions, this one does kind of say if there's any previous stain there, you should sand it all off. But I'm just going to try it over the top. As I say, it's for practical purposes, not making it pretty. This is another thing I got recently, just a little 1-ton scissor jack. This is really good on the Riley because 1, it'll lift it up quite a long way, and 2, this fits really nicely under the springs, or under the front axle, but it fits perfectly under the rear spring hanger to lift up the car. So that's been really useful. I have been considering my original plan to skin the body of this in aluminium. So the Austin 7 I did in aluminium, a little Austin 7 special. and my mentor Joss taught me how to do the metalwork and how to gas weld it. So we used oxyacetylene to weld this. It's not easy. It's hard, and it's hard to know if I've got decent welds here. You can see there's the remnants of one of the welds where it's a little bit sunken in, and I never actually fixed that. Aluminium welding has all sorts of difficulties associated with it. When you're gas welding it, you use flux, and it's a very corrosive flux, and it's very difficult to get it out of the metal and out of the welds when you're finished. Even if you wet everything down and you neutralize it, there's a good chance there'll still be some there. It's really hard to get even penetration on it. It's just difficult to do. You're trying to weld it, and all of a sudden it just melts. It's just gone. So the other option is TIG welding it, which is how most modern stuff would be done these days. The problem with that is it leaves the welds pretty hard, and they're prone to cracking. Interestingly, Joss, after teaching me how to do this on my car and doing his own special, then had an expert TIG welder go over his whole car to make sure the welds were good, which always I thought was amusing. So my plan was to do this in aluminium, but I've been thinking about it the last week or two, and I've decided to actually do it in steel. And the reason I'm going to do it in steel is there's various reasons. The main one and the most important one is that's what they were from the factory. So the Dord Riley Brooklands, the sort of touring cars, the road cars, were steel bodied. And of course I know that because I've got one of the original door skins here, and this is steel. You can tell because it's rusted. Steel is easier for me to work. It's about the same as aluminium actually for shaping it, but it's far easier to weld. It's far easier to paint, and it's far easier to repair later if you need to. If you've got an aluminium bodied car and that gets dented or dinged or damaged, it's a massive pain in the neck to fix that. If it's steel body, it's still a lot of work, but it's much easier, and it's much easier to just cut out the bits you need and weld in new pieces. The steel, of course, is much stronger and more resilient as well. So given that's what Riley did, that's what I've decided I'm going to do for this car. The main disadvantage is, of course, weight. I will use 1mm steel for this because measuring the door skin, that seems to be what they used at the factory. It's a little bit hard to get a decent measurement, but you sort of measure around various places, and that seems to be what the thickness is. Aluminium, I would have used 1.6 mil, just because it's easier to weld, and it gives you more to file back. So that's the other thing with the aluminium welding. I know I can do a really nice TIG weld on thin sheet aluminium without using filler, and it makes it much easier to finish. The aluminium, you need filler, you need welding rod, you have to clean all that back, you have to grind it back, you have to hammer everything to get it hard again. It's just a lot of work. So I'm going to use steel for the body, same as Riley did. The other problem with an aluminium body, especially on a vintage car like this, and especially on this particular style of vintage car, where your chassis rails are open C-sections and there is no stiffness in the chassis rails at all. The chassis rails on these are very flexible and the springs are very stiff. This is kind of a vintage car, pre-war car thing. It's kind of just how they were. And obviously a lot of people going racing will stiffen up the cars because that's what you want in a race car. You want it very stiff. But this isn't a race car, it's going to be a road car. And part of the appeal of the vintage road cars is the way they move and the way they flex and the way they go down the road, and everything moves and vibrates, and you can see the scuttle twisting as you go over the road surface, and that's what I want. I don't want a race car. And this is the other reason why steel, the weight penalty isn't worrying me too much. So The difference between 1.5mm aluminium and 1mm steel, the aluminium is it's about half the weight. So there will be a little bit of weight in the car because I'm using steel, but I think it's still worth it. And I looked at some calculators online. These are mainly for drag races, and you can sort of estimate based on the weight of the car and the amount of horsepower you've got what its elapsed time will be and what its top speeds will be and things like that. And honestly, a car like this is slow. Compared to any modern car, these are just ridiculously slow. Even more so given it's not a very powerful engine. I think I used 50 brake horsepower as the figure, and it's hard to know what horsepower you get from an engine like this. The original Brooklands were 50 horsepower, but they had special heads and special cams. This is a standard engine, but it's got higher compression and slightly different cams. It's just hard to know how it will compare. It's probably 40 to 50 brake horsepower. I think for this, based on that and an 800 kg weight, I was getting about 21-second quarter-mile times from the calculators. I don't think you could do it that fast, also because of the nature of the gearbox and having no synchronizers and all that kind of stuff. Basically, what it comes down to is however you look at it, these are not fast cars. They're slow cars compared to anything. I think my girlfriend's Honda Fit with a CVT is probably quicker than this thing will ever be. So speed isn't really the question here. I'm not going to race it, so that doesn't worry me. If you're racing, yeah, sure, you want to get every single little advantage you can. But for this, I want a road car I'm going to keep that's nice and solid and durable. So I'll make it from steel. And some bits of it will still be aluminium. So the firewall will be aluminium, and I've been looking at that, and that's why I've got cardboard everywhere, because I'm going to make some templates and hot glue them together just to see how everything works. Now, the car does have a under tray along the whole bottom of the car. That will still be aluminium because that's just a single flat sheet. There's not a lot to that. And I'm looking at how to do the floor and the firewall, and it's probably easier if we start on the passenger side because it's simple. So what I'm looking at doing, hopefully today before I go away, is put in, it's not exactly a cross member, it's going to be a piece of steel that goes across there, bolted to the chassis rails to give me somewhere to attach the front part of the under tray. As I mentioned, the chassis on these are very flexible. Everything's open sections. So this piece here is kind of a top hat piece. You can see it folds, goes across. It's open on the bottom. So you want to close that in because otherwise you've got holes into the car. So there'll be a sheet of aluminium that goes underneath here, and this will give me a convenient place to bolt some of that in. I am going to follow that round as far as I can, basically up to the sump, up to there, but it's going to need cutouts for the bottom of the gearbox bell housing, for the brake strings, but that's a fairly simple piece of metal to make. It just bolts under the bottom. The reason I've got the wheels turned full lock is to have a look at where the drag link goes, because you have to leave allowances for that. But again, that just means you need bits cut out of the under tray. That's pretty easy. The firewall will be aluminium on here. It comes across here and down about there, somewhere around here. I think I'm going to aim for about the middle, and that will come down probably around like this. So on the passenger side, it will just be a flat floor that comes across like this, cutouts around the gearbox. That'll come up and join the vertical piece. The little sides here are going to be interesting because this isn't straight. This is actually a curve, and I'm going to make little detachable panels that will fill that in that will follow the line of the cross member. They go about halfway along, and I'll just be able to put a little subtle curve in that, just to sort of fill in this hole you'd get otherwise, because otherwise you've got a hole here. But you want the hole there because it gives you good access to bits and pieces. So the passenger side, that's pretty easy. Driver's side gets a lot more complicated because you've got a lot more going on. So you can see here, obviously steering column has to pass through the firewall. Small holes for things like this aren't too bad. There's a hole for this, there'll be holes for the wiring, holes for the choke cable. That's the tachometer drive. I need to show the tachometer in a minute as well. But on this side of the car, it gets a little bit more interesting because you've got pedals. And looking at pictures of originals, again, you find no two are original. The most original one, or the one I tend to use as the best example, is 8079. I think that car, it has been restored, but it's pretty original. And that's a nice touring Brooklands. So on that, there is a flat floor. Now my setup is a little bit different because I've got the slightly later brake setup. So there's the brake rod down here that actually actuates the brakes. This is just a tension rod. This is just here to link the braking mechanism with the shaft through the gearbox so it can't move. So this shaft doesn't move. It's fine to have it in the middle there. What I'm going to do is make a split floor, and I'm going to angle it down. So 8079 has a flat floor, and then it has a metal tray sunk into it, like a little heel well that's actually sunk into the floor. What I'm going to do on mine is I'm going to have a straight piece here because that's fine for resting your clutch foot. Down here you need a bit more heel room, so I'm going to angle it down so it joins this support at the bottom. I'll fill in that side there, and the firewall piece gets a little bit fiddly because of all these holes you need, but that'll be in multiple sections, and again that'll come down like this and then probably come in and then drop straight down. And that means I don't need too many cutouts for the pedals won't get in the way. I can make this all neat and tidy. It's just a matter of how do you assemble it, because you want to be able to take all of this off. You want to be able to take the body off the car completely, including the firewall. So it'll just be interesting how I work out where the panels go and how they're going to join on. And I think what I'll do is I will make the aluminium firewall, and it will have aluminium angle iron, quite thin, or quite not deep, 1/2 inch maybe, 3mm thick, so I can tap it. Either that, I can tap it, or I can put bolts through it, so that you can bolt all of these little sections in place individually, which gives you access to things as well. And this is why I've got the steering full lock, to see where the end of the drag link comes, because again the under tray you're going to need, or I'm going to need a cutout to allow for that, just a little scallop out of it. And I wanted to make sure that if I've got the floor coming in, this is why I've got this angle, Cocoa Pops, sort of like that. That's what I'm trying to do today anyway, which is why I've got cardboard everywhere, because I find what helps is you cut out all these little pieces from scrap bits of cardboard and you hot glue them together into a single piece to give you the templates you need. So that's where I'm at with that. Having the wheels full lock as well made me realize you need to make sure you don't have the headlamps too far outboard, because you'll hit them. So I've got them pretty much the center line of the shock will be the center line of the headlamps. That seems to work pretty well and look pretty good. What else? I think I mentioned the little P-clamps. I'm still figuring out the wiring. I did order, one thing I had to remember to order was an earth strap and an engine earth strap. These are actually from a Mini. So I will earth the battery straight to the chassis rail. I can go from here and actually earth it to the rail. And then up on this end, you have to remember that the engine is mounted on these rubber cones, so this is all isolated. I'm sure there's a earth return path there, but probably not a very good one. So what I will do is earth it to the actual chassis rail here somewhere, straight to the starter motor or to the gearbox housing, probably to here. This is all connected through. So hopefully I can get some of that floor stuff done today. I did also order nuts and bolts from the UK. I did a spreadsheet and figured out everything I needed and did one big order, and then promptly discovered things I'd forgotten, like the bolts for the diagonals, but I did order extra. And I had to shop around a bit, so I ended up getting this load from Namric. The postage to New Zealand was 40 quid for all of that. Another place I looked at wanted £70 just for the postage. So it takes ages because you need to see who's got what you want to order. Namric, the order goes over what their online calculator can tell you, so you have to email them to get a price. They came back very quickly. It only took a day or two, so that was fine. But it's just a little bit annoying that you have to do that and you have to wait. So that order is on the way. I'll probably have to make another one for all the bits I forgot. The other thing I'm waiting for is from the place in Australia. I kind of want to make sure I can actually get 2 more of these hinges before I start attaching the doors. From Namric, I was able to get countersunk BSF machine screws, so I will be able to screw the door hinges all the way through. I need to mount these on the doors so that I can finish making the brackets on the front, sort of curved piece there, so I can bolt all of that together, figure out how that's going to go. I also need to drill and put bolts through this front floor piece, and then I can look at putting the battens on the bottom of these so that it doesn't slide around, to get those seat bases fixed in place. And I'm still trying to figure out exactly what the rules are around the seatbelt mountings and where they need to go, because they'll have to go in there somewhere, but I'm pretty sure I should be able to get them in there, and that matches how they're supposed to be done. So I think that's where we're at the moment. I have finished making up the main piece of the cross member, support, not really cross member. From a piece of angle, I made 1/4" blocks that I've welded into the ends. These are TIG welded in place, and then I was able to drill and tap them at the correct angle. So this angle matches the angle of the chassis rails. The notches are to clear the brake mechanism and the brake strings, so they clear there and there if I've milled these little slots in the right place, and I've generously rounded off the edges so the cable can't catch on those. It should be clear of them, but you never know with the cable sort of rattling around. I just want to make sure there's no sharp edges there. Eventually all of this will be painted, of course. I'll put it in the car so we can see how it looks. So you can see now I have that support in place, just a single bolt to hold it. Doing this one up is quite confusing because it's going in perpendicular to the chassis rails. So this isn't, because this is perpendicular to the front rear direction of the car. So you're trying to thread this in while you're looking at this, and it looks like it's all gone cockeyed, but it hasn't. So it goes through perpendicular to this plane. That gets held in quite nicely. If we look over this side, you can clearly see the little notch for the brake cable, if I can get in there. So there's plenty of room there. And you can also see how the under tray will follow this and curve up and follow the bottom of the chassis rails. And you can also see from this side, maybe it's better, how I'm going to put in the floor on the driver's side, how it'll slope down like that. And I've tested that out. That fits perfectly for me to fit in there when I'm wearing the right shoes and give me enough space for the pedals. This is just a piece of scrap. Just to show how little room is in there, these are my work boots, my steel boots that I use in Big Shed. These aren't big, these are size 7, UK 7, but you can see there's no way you could drive the car in something like that. You just can't get to the pedals. So how people with bigger shoes than me do it, I don't know. So this one will probably go right across to there. I need to leave that because of course this moves, and come up and be a flat floor here for the clutch side. And with a bit of careful cutting, I can cut this out of a single piece of aluminium and just fold it, I think. So there's a bent flange here to keep it flat with this, and there'll be another one at the bottom there. That has to be bent at quite an angle because this is angle iron and this isn't a 90-degree angle down here. The flanges will have to have a slight kick to them, but there's no problem doing that. But that kind of shows how the footwell side will work. And what I want to be able to do is have all the floor in place. Those pieces are separate to the firewall. And the firewall should now, if I've got the dimensions correct, I should be able to run it straight down and pick up on this. So it'll come up, follow the line of the floor to here. So it goes straight across and down and bolts to that. And the idea is, with that piece of the firewall in place, I think what will happen is you'll put in the lower pieces first and bolt those in place. And where they can come up to here, there'll be a hole for this, of course. And then when you put the top part of this on, the actual body part, you'll be able to join the two. You'll just be able to bolt them together through here, which is going to be awkward. So I may need to make up little captive plates because you can't get your arms either side of it easily. You have to think about things like that. I had the same sort of problems on my Austin 7. This is one of the reasons why cutouts on the side will help, because if you've got a big hole here, you can reach your hand and you can get to both sides of the bolts. So that's looking pretty good. My staining over here has dried. I'm just going to leave these other brackets for the week while I'm away. It'll need a few coats, but I think they actually came out okay. They are dry, so before I go in, I will do a coat on the top side. You can see the green. Or should I just leave these? I think they may be dry enough to do another coat. I'll do that and then leave those again for the week. Make sure they're properly dry by the time I get back. And yeah, I think that's coming along quite well.